Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this ACLA meeting. We are privileged to have with us this evening Dr. David and Terry Sumlin of Marriage Life Ministries. Website is marriagelifeministries.com. And if they'll permit me, I'll just read a little bio from the website. The Sumlins founded Marriage Life Ministries in 2012 as a means of proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ through the vessel of marriage and family ministry. As a result, they have the privilege of helping countless couples around the world embrace God's design for marital oneness and experience a marriage beyond anything that they could ever possibly imagine. David and Terry's unique approach to marital education is built upon some of the advances found in neuroscience, psychology, physiology, and adventure-based therapy, which ultimately is tested through the lens of God's word for validation. The result is an adventure-based marital enrichment program that helps couples derive behavioral transformation and sustain learning. Their passion for helping couples embrace God's design for marriage stems from their personal encounter with God's redemptive grace in restoring their own broken marriage. The types of marital programs they offer are threefold: marriage adventures, marriage outbacks, and marriage getaways at intimate resort destinations around the world. In addition to their highly successful marital enrichment programs, they also facilitate marital education for churches, small groups, and organizations in both large conference and intimate workshop venues. So welcome, Dr. and Mrs. Sumlin, or I can call you David and Terry, if that's all right.
David would be fine, yeah.
All right. So one thing that struck me in that description, it talks about marital programs that include marriage adventures, marriage outbacks, and marriage getaways. So this is kind of a unique and interesting approach. Would you be able to explain what those refer to? Adventures, outbacks? I don't think you mean the restaurant. And getaways.
Sure. So Terry and I are full-time marriage educators, and we specialize in experiential learning. So we use adventure-based programs such as whitewater rafting, high ropes, zip lines, that kind of stuff, to get couples out of their comfort zone into a kind of a state of disequilibrium where they feel, they're a little off kilter, a little bit more malleable in terms of teaching and learning. And so our adventure-based programs are held in limited places around the world where we have access to those high adventure type elements. Then we have our Outback program, which is similar in getting couples out into a state of disequilibrium. They sleep in tents, so it's all outdoors. We valet their car, take their phone away, and basically they're off the grid, where they can be intentional about being with each other. And then we create experiential activities that are more on the low rope side, challenging games that they'll play that'll challenge the intellectual intimacy, the emotional intimacy, the spiritual intimacy, in terms of the way they communicate, resolve conflict, that kind of thing. And then our getaways are pretty much destination specific. We hold those around the world in resort hotels. We may do a destination, for example, in Spain. We'll take couples hiking the Camino de Santiago. 7-day, we'll do the 7-day version, roughly 15 miles a day. Take them up in the highlands of Scotland. So that's the difference between our adventures, outbacks, and getaways, but they all have a common element to it in that they're experiential. So we have kind of a teaching philosophy, which is very similar to what God gave Isaiah when he was preparing Isaiah to go out and spread his word. The saying goes like this: I heard and I forgot. I saw and I remembered. I did and I understood. So couples will hear what we say, and that may go in one ear and out the other. But we utilize audio visual video clips from Hollywood movies. They'll remember those. Drama skits, things like that. But it's the doing, it's getting them up out of their chairs and actually doing something that relates to the content for which we're discussing or that session. That's where the understanding comes in. That's where they'll remember it. And so, in effect, through 6 years of doctoral research, these retreats are different than your typical lecture-oriented didactic teaching where couples just sit in a chair for hours on end and listen to someone lecture to them. Ours are different. And 84, we've kind of tested this, 84% of couples who go through our marital-based, adventure-based programming tend to sustain the incremental improvements to their relationship well after the mountaintop experience. And we're talking years after they've gone through our programs. They're communicating more effectively, resolving conflict, and basically tilting their chin 2 inches up to get God's perspective of what really is important in this life on this side of heaven, which is each other, their marriage, loving each other well. So that's a kind of a long answer to your question, but that's it.
No, that's good. That is fascinating, and I can relate to what you're saying. Actually, I know some couples who did parachuting
You know,
to kind of, and of course they were totally scared to death to do that. But kind of getting out of your, like you say, out of your comfort zone, kind of puts you in a different place where you kind of have to really put yourself in God's hands
exactly.
in a very direct way, and also getting away from the cell phone and all that kind of stuff. I think that's awesome. Yeah, you did mention about your doctoral work. So, Dr. David, well, what sort of doctoral studies have you done? And are you also a pastor, by the way? Or
I am.
okay.
So I attended Dallas Theological Seminary, my master's in biblical counseling, my doctorate in marriage and family ministry, where my doctoral research was really studying the effects of adventure-based programming, the impact that has on marital enrichment. And it really stemmed from, the first 7 years of our marriage. We were at a point 7 years into it where we were calling it quits. We were done looking for divorce attorneys. And during that time of healing, Terry would take me to all these marriage conferences. And I tell you, I'd stay for maybe the first night and then I would leave. Because I'm like, well, that speaker doesn't know what I'm going through, kind of thing. And so when I had an opportunity to study the effects of adventure-based programming as it relates to marital enrichment, it gave me an opportunity to really create something that is far more effective than anything we've ever seen before. And that really led to some very strategic relationships with organizations such as Wind Shaped Marriage out of Rome, Georgia. And yeah, just
And you use the ropes courses as your laboratory to do your research. So
right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And I'm going to go a little geeky on you if I could. I'll just take a quick second.
Sure.
The way I studied this is we know couples, when they get into an escalated argument, we know physiologically the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. They basically get in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, or what we call DPA. And a lot of counselors, Dr. John Gottman, one of my mentors, a researcher in the field of marriage and family ministry, has always said our traditional ways of counseling are not working. We've got to find a different way of doing this. So in short, what I would do is we would teach couples how to resolve conflict in the morning and then simulate conflict in the afternoon by putting them 50 feet up in the air on a tightrope strapped into a harness system, wearing a biofeedback monitor. So I have that biofeedback monitor tethered to an iPad in real time. I'm monitoring their heart rates, oxygen levels, all that kind of stuff. And I've got cameras strategically set up on the course, recording verbal communication, eye movement, body language, all of that. And basically, we would simulate conflict by getting these couples in that state of fight, flight, or freeze while they're up on the cable. The difference is they can't run away. They can't leave. They've got to employ the techniques we've given them in terms of self-soothing, deep breathing exercises, bringing God's truth into their conversation. Honey, it's okay. Remember, God said we ought not be anxious for anything, but in everything through prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let our requests be made known to God. Do you want that? Do you want that peace that he has to offer? And couples who practiced or employed those techniques while they were in that state, where their heart rates were above 95 beats per minute, clear indication that they were in fight, flight, or freeze. Those couples who employed those techniques were able to reverse the process, invoke the parasympathetic nervous system much quicker than they would if they had not. And therefore, we kind of proved out, basically over 6 years of doing this, that those couples not only could de-escalate much sooner, but it seemed to have had an indelible impact in their memory in terms of they're on the same team. They can accomplish it. They can get through this. They too can, with God's help, can get through this difficult challenge. And that had just lasting benefits. So I don't know, went a little researchy on you, but that's, yeah.
Wow. I must admit, I've never heard of anything quite like that. Like you say, there are a lot of marriage ministries and give a lot of good content, but I've never heard of anything like you just described. Apparently it's pretty successful. How over the last 12 years, have you made a lot of changes to the program? Have you added or modified things?
Constantly. You can speak to the surveys we do. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, so we're constantly putting in place evaluation before they arrive and upon departure. And so we know what's working, what's not working. Each venue we've kind of have had to modify. So some of our adventure camps that we use in California, New Zealand, around the country, we know which elements are effective and which ones are not. And so we've eliminated the ones that are not. And we tend to focus or hone in on the sessions that are giving research-based, research-proven, biblically based tools that will help these couples attain the level of marital quality or marital satisfaction that they desire. And that in itself is based on research. So we're only giving them the most effective tools used by highly satisfied couples.
And what we found is truth, and research and facts, that doesn't change. So the content itself doesn't change a whole lot. I mean, what we'll do is we'll change our presentation styles depending on the audience, especially now with this new generation coming up. They're going to perceive things a lot differently. We got to go a lot faster. We have to really study the audience and the generation, and that will tweak how we present and what we present to a point. But God's word's the truth, and everyone wants to work on communication. Everyone needs to work on conflict resolution. That doesn't change. But the presentation does.
Yeah, and it seems like I think even over the last 12 years, there's been a I don't know. I see quite a cultural shift. You probably have too in terms of people's view of marriage. How would you say, what kind of trends have you noticed with marriages since you started your ministry? Are people more reluctant or more likely to get married than they used to? And as far as their view of having children, what have you noticed over these last years?
Yeah, so we're privileged in that we get to be Terry and I are part of a research collective, which is underwritten by Chick-fil-A and WinShape Marriage, where we bring in the top researchers, retreat leaders, counselors, authors, and basically into a think tank once a year, and we look over the latest research, what's trending with different generations. Some things that are alarming just off the top of my head. One, the decline in marriage young couples just are simply not getting married anymore. The rate of marriage is going down. And it's a lot of different factors. You know, a lot of it's myths that they've bought into. These young people think, well, if I get married, I'm not going to be rich. I'm not going to be able to travel the world. You know, I'm going to fight all the time like my parents did, you know, kind of thing. And while maybe some of that's true, the research is very clear that couples who marry tend to be wealthier, healthier, live longer, and when applying the intentionality to their marriage, can actually have a beautiful, wonderful marriage that, like Gary Thomas says, you know, it's not so much about your happiness as much as it is about your holiness. And it's helping them learn to be holy. So that's a trend we see. We also see an alarming trend in the area of cohabitation, where maybe in years past, couples would maybe live together just to try out you know, is this going to work? Are you compatible? Are you the right, you know, husband or wife for me? Now we're seeing a shift in that these cohabitating couples are getting pregnant. Let's have a child so I can see what kind of father you would be or what kind of mother you would be. And if it works out, then maybe we'll get married. And so that's not across, you know, certain ethnic lines where we've seen in the past. This is across the board. There is no, you know, used to be economic factors made a difference, or, you know, now none of that makes a difference anymore.
One thing we've seen is couples are getting married much older now than they used, you know, now it's in their mid-30s. And as that can be very beneficial because they're more mature, they're learning more about themselves, their brains are more, you know, formed and so forth. However, the one downside we're really seeing is they now, if they're 35 years old, they've been living alone by themselves. They've each got their own lives. They've each got their own habits, their customs, traditions, and all that, the way they have been living life. And so it's actually really hard for them now to come in and have to figure out how to do this with another person. Whereas couples who in the past would get married at 21, 22, 23, right out of the parents' house into, you know, and so they never had this time alone, really. And so we're just seeing, yeah, a lot of couples getting married older, sort of struggling in the beginning because they don't know how to sacrifice.
Which is also interesting, especially with Gen Z. We're seeing this with millennials, you know, where you might have a 2.5, you know, household with children, 2.5 children, or if that's even possible, 2 to 3 children. Now what we're seeing is a lot more single child families, and these children are born into a wealthier family, an adjusted family, which is also kind of it kind of lays the background for entitlement. So what we thought we've seen in entitlement with previous generations, it's only going to get worse. So these couples or these children are being born basically with a silver spoon in their mouth. You know, come out of college, they expect to be CEO of their companies within a year, you know, at 20 something years old. And so we're going to see a lot more of that. You're going to see a lot less of what we would experience loyalty in corporate America. So, yeah. So Europe and Western culture is very similar to that.
It seems that yeah, when people get married young, you know, if they make a commitment, I guess that which comes first, the commitment, or you know, you kind of go through the experience, say, well, you know, if something rough comes up, then we can always just, you know, separate.
Right.
But if you have that commitment up front, it seems like, okay, we know we're going to go through some rough patches, and we are determined and we're committed to God and to each other to overcome that for the sake of our family.
Exactly. And if you look at the Asian culture, especially in, you know, where there's still arranged marriages, The commitment is what the relationship's built on. The two families have committed for that on behalf of that relationship. Now the husband and wife have to learn how to like each other, how to fall in love with each other, which is years down the road. And basically, they're coming into a relationship without a divorce hatch. There's no escape hatch to crawl out of. And what we find in Asian cultures, the divorce rate's actually lower. It's steadily climbing, but for different reasons. More so, the Western influence has made its way into those areas, the decline of arranged marriages. But that, I don't know.
There's part of us that sort of likes that arranged marriage concept.
Yeah, we do a lot of premarital counseling with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely seems like there's a lot of benefits for when people get married, can get married a little younger, you know, in their 20s, especially as you get older, and you want to play with your grandkids, right?
Right.
And if you don't get married and don't start having kids, so you're in your mid-30s, it's a big difference than if you have them when you're in your early 20s and you can do more with them. And yeah, that's one practical thing I see different in the younger versus the older ones. So, I believe, you see marriage the way you describe marriage on the website. And by the way, I think there's a few people who want to ask some questions. I was going to open up to questions in the last part of this meeting, if that's okay with you. So if those people can hold off for a few minutes. Yeah, so what do you feel is, God's plan? You talk about God's plan for marriage, which started even with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. What is so special and unique in marriage and family that makes it so fundamental to God's plan of creation and plan for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe, in Mark's Gospel, chapter 10, Jesus is addressing a very important question of the Pharisees. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife and just send her on her way, be done with her? And Jesus, in a brilliant response, after asking, well, what did Moses command you? And they say, well, Moses just simply said, as long as a man has a certificate of divorce, you can send her on her way. But I want to know from you, do you believe it's lawful? And Jesus is brilliant. He takes the Pharisees all the way back to the stillness of the garden, recorded for us in Genesis chapter 2, and basically lays out what I would call a theology of marriage, that after God had created them both, male and female, it's for this reason: a man will leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. And let no man separate what God has brought together. And so I believe the uniqueness of a Judeo-Christian marriage is that, one, it's exclusive. It's exclusive in at least a couple of different ways. In one way, it's exclusive. Well, God created them male and female. And I know this gets a lot of controversy at, some of our retreats, because we've been debating about this, not just in our country, but in countries around the world. But I go back to God's word. And the second way it's exclusive in that it's only between a husband and wife, which simply means this: the secretary from your office is not allowed to enter this relationship. The CrossFit trainer, tennis pro, not allowed to enter this relationship. It's exclusive between a husband and wife. It's not only exclusive, it's also intimate. The two became one flesh. There's only one way, literally, you become one flesh, and that's through the act of intercourse. But that's not to negate also the emotional, intellectual, spiritual intimacy and vulnerability that couples bring together as they become one. It's permanent. The two are joined together. It means the same thing in both Hebrew and Greek. Superglued together. Let no one tear apart what God has superglued together. Not only is it exclusive, intimate, and permanent, it's also safe. Jesus didn't quote this, but you go back to what Moses wrote in Genesis 2. They were naked and unashamed in the garden. We ask our couples, when was the last time you could stand in front of each other naked and unashamed? I mean, for the young people, that's easy to do now, but wait till they get older. It's not so easy. But not just physically naked and unashamed, but emotionally, spiritually, intellectually naked and unashamed, being vulnerable with each other.
And the part that we always say as we were trying to rebuild our marriage is the part to me that is the whole picture of what marriage is supposed to be about. And that's the picture of how Christ loves his bride, the church. So we talk about the holiness of marriage. And so many people in our Western culture get married with the expectation of the happily ever after. And they get married thinking, it's all about me. You're going to meet my needs. You're going to make me happy. It's all, I'm going to be fulfilled. I'm going to be the complete me mentality. And just trying to get across, no, we are to love. And that's sort of what the purpose of marriage, God, it tells us to love as he loves us and to love our wives and husbands as he loves us. So he uses marriage as an instrument to try to teach us how to love the way he loves us, the way he loves his church, the bride. And so to try to get that picture across that, yes, God does want us to be happy. He says life eternal, life abundant, but it's more about him refining you and changing you and sanctifying you to teach you how to love the way he loves us. And he's using your marriage and your spouse as his instrument to do that.
Yeah.
So.
Wonderful. Yeah, I also think back to even the first chapter of Genesis where it says God created man in his image, male and female. Because when you read through the Bible, sometimes God seems like a really strong, powerful father figure, masculine fighter, that kind of thing. And there's other times when God's nature comes across as gentle and nurturing, like more feminine,
Right.
right? And then coming together, it seems like it creates the perfect unity, which creates the resemblance of God in all of his different aspects. So that's yeah. So you talk about this first marital union of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. I do seem to recall though that they did run into some problems. Yeah, in that chapter 2, or
Yeah.
was it 3? I think 3.
Yeah.
Where the wife Eve was listening to somebody she shouldn't have been taking advice from, and then Adam listening to that bad advice from her, and even they had their sons ending up committing crimes. So I mean, do you ever see situations that kind of remind you of that, where maybe one spouse is listening to
Absolutely.
voices that are not helpful from other people?
Yes.
That actually, when we talk about the exclusivity of marriage, we really talk about that, it's between you and your spouse. And if you need help and you need godly advice, go to a godly person, go to your pastor, go to your clergy, go to your lay, people. We just see so many, especially young couples, run to their parents, run to their best friends, and they are just getting very biased, unhealthy advice, just trying to tickle the ear type of thing instead of giving them truth. We were very, very thankful that we had both of our fathers really stepped in when we were struggling and sat us down and gave us truth, especially, my dad probably. And
Absolutely.
it wasn't biased. He wasn't playing favorites. He gave us godly, biblical help. And that's a huge part of why we're still together today.
Well, that's wonderful. I think that may not be as common as it should be.
You're right.
Because your parents tend to be very, prejudicial towards
Exactly.
their own child and yeah, siblings and things like that. But that's great that you could have that experience. Maybe just one final question before we kind of open it up. Do you do only like group activities, involving like seminars or couples? Do you ever do individual counseling? Do you counsel singles about the benefits of marriage and try to encourage them towards that, or is it just married couples?
Yeah, good question. So we do have counseling. Counseling is a part of what we do. It's getting harder and harder with the schedule that we have, where we're doing 40 to 50 events per year. What we end up kind of doing is, as we're on the road constantly, so we'll finish a retreat on Sunday or Monday and basically driving to the next city, and people that have gone to our retreats before know we're coming into their city and say, hey, is there any way you could meet with us for an hour before your retreat starts? So we do those kind of things. We do a lot of premarital counseling, which is scheduled um, in our ministry. And it's interesting, the activities you talk about. So we do group activities in large settings. Even in church settings, we will do just a couple activities. So it's just you and your spouse with a challenging puzzle you have to put together, or something that's going to allow you to have a conversation about the way, the most effective ways you communicate and the maladaptive ways in which you resolve conflict, those kind of things. So we do individual, couple. And then in terms of singles, it's interesting. I don't know if you know what MOPS is, Mothers of Preschoolers.
It's nationwide.
It's a nationwide organization.
Okay.
We have, believe it or not, been invited in several times to speak just to women. Not so much men, but women, single women, mothers, single moms. And so in those types of situations, we're helping them understand the benefits of marriage, but also understanding, the journey of parenting, what that looks like, both as a couple and as a single parent, how that would apply. So we do a fair amount of that as well. Yeah.
And we do. There's one other thing. We've only done it a few times, and they're friends of ours, personal friends, but we've done family counseling where there's been multiple people, either husband and wife, or the family itself is having issues communicating. And so we've gone and done intensive weekend retreats for entire families together.
Especially during COVID.
Yeah.
Everybody's living in the same house, and it just disrupted routines and schedules, and people were at each other's end. And so we were asked to do a lot of that.
Do you have an in-law ministry?
I wish we did.
I
In our
know.
premarital counseling, it's interesting. Our couples, these young couples that are either seriously dating or engaged, will pull us aside and say, is there any way you can meet with my parents? Because that's oftentimes it's all about unmet expectations.
Yeah.
The expectations that parents are putting on their children in terms of how we're going to spend our first holiday together, those kind of things.
It's funny, one of the activities we do sometimes, it's a form of a dodgeball, and there's a green, a yellow, and a red ball you throw. And the green ball represents those daily things you have to deal with. You have the balls coming at you, it's schedules, it's finances. And so I always ask, well, what could this green ball represent? And usually someone will say, oh, your parents and your in-laws. 9 times out of 10, people will jump in. No, that's a red ball. That's a red ball. That's one that's going to take you out, So it's an issue. It is.
Yeah.
Sure is. So before again open up to questions, is there anything, David or Terry, that you would like to share, kind of wrap up just overall, or should we just open up to questions? You can go ahead if you want to say anything.
Yeah, I would just say, we feel like we're on mission in many ways. We're kind of like gypsies, missionaries, called to just tilt the chins of couples, just tilt their chin 2 inches up to get God's perspective to help them embrace his design for marriage, his blueprint for marriage, and what that looks like. And
And one thing we feel very strongly about is we are very vulnerable and real ourselves. So in pretty much every retreat we go to, by the end, people are like, I can't believe y'all are so transparent, and you share your fights and your, everything you struggle with. And we're like, we never want to come across that we've got it all figured out and we're perfect. We struggle just with everyone like everyone else does. We just have learned the tools of how to push through that, so.
That's very hopeful. Okay, well, let's open it up in the last 15-20 minutes to questions or comments. Anybody would have something you'd like to say or any comments? Please raise your hand. Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me okay without background noise?
Yeah, we can understand. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to really endorse your couple, that effort, much needed. We actually know a lot of people who, you could say, perhaps wrestled with the angel and got victory, and then started a group to lead others to do the same thing. I think we could probably, if we were honest here, we'd all admit we could benefit from one of your camping trips. But I'm wondering, how do you find these people who are willing to, make that effort? Do you like advertise online, go to different churches, put in advertisements in the newspaper, or what?
Yeah, it's interesting. So a lot of what we do, a lot of the retreats, the church retreats, conferences that we do, simply stem from a couple who comes to one of our retreats. Maybe they come out to Northern California and go to one of our retreats or adventure camps. They go back to their church and talk to their pastor and say, "Hey, can we bring this couple in and lead a church conference?" And that's really kind of how it starts. We don't do any advertising necessarily. It's all word of mouth. We don't ever have to go find. In fact, a lot of our retreats, especially our outbacks, the waiting list just to get in the retreat is almost 3 times the number of spaces we have available. So God has just blessed us beyond imagination. We've never had to worry about that. Yeah.
And we tried it once or twice and we're like, you know what, we're not event planners. So we don't plan the event. We don't say this is where we're going to go, let's plan it. We just wait to be invited. So we will come in and we'll bring our activities, we'll bring our content, but whoever is hosting it is responsible for getting the couples there maybe, or planning the whole thing. So yeah, whoever decides they want to host the event is usually the one who gets the word out and gets the people there.
Great. Yeah, I think, go ahead, David.
Well, I was going to say, it's interesting that Gary Thomas, who's a good friend of ours, if you're familiar with Gary's writing, he tells stories. He's a storyteller and basically writes stories anonymously. So he kind of protects the anonymity of these people who he's interviewing. But it was interesting when Gary turned in his draft to his editor, the comment that came back was, "No, you need to ask the Sumlins for their permission to put their real names, their address, their phone number, their website, all of that." We went from never doing any retreats in Michigan, Illinois, South Carolina, and now this year alone, since January, we'll have done 5 retreats in Michigan. No, 5 retreats in Illinois, 3 in Michigan, and we have 2 scheduled for next year in Michigan. And so that's it. It's all because of that book. So yeah, it's great.
It's great. And I think sounds like you've kind of figured out what your gifts are that God has blessed you with, and you just try to let God use you for those gifts, and you can't do everything, right?
Right.
Okay, who else has some comment or question about it? Dr. Pereira, yes, you can unmute yourself.
I have a question. Since that you're touching from the point of view of theology, excuse my voice, and the view of the psychology of marriage or the education of marriage. But chapter 2 of Genesis, you talk about, God was experimenting with different females. Nothing was working out. And then he said, well, never mind, go to sleep. I'll take care of it. Now, all of a sudden, there is something less in Adam, and this other thing becomes in itself. Now, I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about that. If someday you say, well, gosh, this is why I need my wife, because something like this is missing in me. Does that ever happen?
Yes. In terms of companionship, romance, there's a lot of the things that I often, there have been times in our relationship where we have fallen short of each other's expectations. And when that happens, it opens the door for contempt to come in. I'm not sure this is really getting at your question, but it's in those moments where I have to be intentional about seeing Terry, us seeing each other the way we did when God brought us together. And there are times where I will just marvel just at staring at my wife and just in awe that um, that God allows me to be with her. And it's in those moments where um, I see past the filters of resentment, unforgiveness, contempt, bitterness, and I start to fall back into like with my wife, um, where I'm reminded of the reason we got married. And
And
so,
we-
yeah.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about that role of a helpmate. You know, it stems from, you know, the rib coming out of Adam, and not only the privilege of being a helpmate, but the responsibility of being a helpmate. And from that same picture in the garden. And one of the activities that I like that we do is we take the fruit of the spirit, the 9 fruits of the spirit, and we say, as a helpmate, you know, can you identify where do you see your spouse really submitting to the Holy Spirit? You see them, the Spirit is leading their life, and let them know. And we actually have little coins. Give them that fruit. So, you know what? I really see patience in you. I can see the Spirit's alive in you and allowing the Spirit to lead in this area. However, as your helpmate, can I also point out maybe those areas that you might not realize that you're squelching the spirit? You're still trying to control the spirit. So yes, you are great with patience, but you know what? I think you're still trying to control and not letting the spirit lead in your gentleness type of thing, whatever. Anyway, so just another role of the helpmate, that we are complete. We are one together. And just that idea of oneness, we use that over and over in our retreats and our beliefs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I counseled a couple today. I was talking to a husband. They finalized their divorce just a month ago, and he has been battling with severe clinical depression. Can't get up in the morning, doesn't want to go to work. His life is over. He is just full of helplessness and hopelessness. And he went to a psychiatrist who quickly thought, well, let's put him on medication. And there's times where medication can certainly help kind of those mood swings. But what he was not understanding is there was an identity created, a unique DNA created between here, a man and a woman who entered the oneness of marriage, and now that marriage has been dissolved. He's going through an identity crisis. He doesn't know who he is as a single man, as a single father to his children. All he knows is who he has become as one with this woman, and it's just wrecking his world. It's tearing me apart. So I don't know if that speaks to what you were referring as well. That God's created us in such a way where when we do become one, let no man separate what God has brought together, because it'll hurt. There's gnashing of teeth. I've never met a divorced couple that says, oh, this is the greatest thing in the world. I recommend it for everybody. Everybody should get a divorce. No one ever says that. You get along with your exes so well, and your kids are so well adjusted. Nobody says that. In fact, what they tell us is, if my first spouse would have come to something like this, a retreat like this, or maybe if I would have come to something like this, maybe things would have been different. Maybe we would have had a different understanding or perspective of what's important. So I don't know if that answered that or not.
I like how you described marriage as God's blueprint, because if God created the world and created human beings, he created us to function and to find happiness in a certain way, right? And that would be the institution of marriage and the love in marriage and family. And if that's the blueprint, then means that's the only way it can really work. Right?
Mhm.
And that can bring the desired result. So I like that analogy. Anybody else? Maybe one more question.
Yeah, I had a question.
Yes, David.
I've been in some of Dr. Eggerich's Love and Respect conferences, and his emphasis or focus how God created man and woman differently, no? Does that come up in your counseling? Like, is that something that you feel is also important to say how different men and women are in being able to communicate with each other?
It is. We do a whole session on personality. And what's interesting about it, the only gender difference in personalities, and I'm speaking to Myers-Briggs for a second, is 70% of men are thinkers, 70% of women feel more comfortable expressing emotion or feelings. Well, that's going to impact the way you make decisions as a couple. That's going to impact the way you process through information. And so we try to highlight, you know, kind of your preference. Because it doesn't mean if 70% of men are thinkers, it doesn't mean that men don't feel emotion. They absolutely do. But they find it more difficult to express emotion or express feelings. Now, where that gets can get a couple into a difficult situation is when they're trying to resolve conflict. A man typically will come at it from logic. And one of the reasons I believe that's true is because there's a deep-seated emotional need of 70% of men to know they've got what it takes to be successful in this life at whatever they put their mind to. And they need to know from their wives that their wives believe in them. That's a big difference between men and women, because for women, 70% of women, their deep emotional need is they just want to know they're valued. They want to know that their husband values them in such a way that they are worth his pursuit. Not, so I think one of the greatest needs of a woman is for her husband to pursue her in a way that's meaningful to her.
And that's all based on Eggerichs. Well, it's based on Ephesians, love, husbands, love your wives, wives, respect your husbands. And so those two simple words, love and respect, so we sort of blow that up and dig a little deeper into it in all areas to make sure that, women, I have learned, that's one of the biggest things I've had to learn in our 34 years of marriage is how I can unintentionally really hurt his ego without even realizing it, because I don't realize he has that deep, deep need to know that he has what it takes to be successful. And he has learned that even just a rolling of the eye can just crush me. To him, it's no big deal, but to me, it just crushes me. So and so we talk a lot about that communication and how we're so different. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Thank you. That's kind of confirms my own experience with my wife.
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think you're saying that men and women should try not to be men and women or try to be
No,
something different, but we have to at least understand how God created us differently, right?
exactly.
And love and respect those differences.
Exactly.
So that's wonderful.
And,
Okay,
and if I might just add,
yes,
that's
Dave.
actually when you figure that out is what makes marriage so interesting.
Yes.
Because you don't know where she's going to come from.
Exactly. You're gonna laugh or cry at what I just did,
Well, and it's true for us. The first 7 years of marriage, I thought it was a handicap. I thought I obviously married the wrong person. She doesn't think like I do. She doesn't make decisions like I do. Now what we've learned to do is celebrate those differences, celebrate the unique DNA that God has brought together between a man and a woman, between me and Terry, David and Terry, because our unique DNA is different than your DNA between you and your spouse. And so you have to learn to really appreciate and appreciate the way God has made you.
I think it would be helpful if people, especially young people, would get that kind of education even early on, even before going into a relationship. Because like you said, a lot of us kind of went into the relationship kind of not really understanding that and having false expectations.
Yep.
So that would be helpful. Um,
All about learning to die to yourself, and that's hard. That's hard to do, but that's what Jesus calls us to
Right.
do. Die to yourself.
we always think that people should do it our own way, right? That we've got it right. Let me share this screen. This is the website, marriagelifeministries.com. And if you see here on the left, you see all the schedule. I guess this is 2024, beginning in January.
Yeah.
And you look at all that, North Carolina. I don't really see South Carolina here though.
It's
It
next
will be
year.
in 25. We'll be in
Okay, all right. I'll
Greenville.
bring it back up. Oh, Greenville. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you see even California, there's a bunch of them here, and wow. Yeah, you are traveling all over the place.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. Encourage everybody to go there. There's different programs here, the adventures, getaways, outbacks, and church events, event registration, various resources. So wow, date night discussion starters. Looks like you've got a lot of good material there that I would encourage everybody to explore. So thank you very much, David and Terry, for your time this evening.
Yeah, thank you.
Perhaps and everyone's participation. Bergie, would you like to say anything to wrap things up for us?
Well, maybe David and Terry might give a short comment about how God guided them to this, if that's not too long.
Mm.
Just maybe, how did God lead you to this ministry?
It is a long answer, so I'm going to try to shorten it. It was through the struggles in our own marriage. So just real quickly, David was consumed with work, climbing the corporate ladder, abandoned his family, figuratively. Because of that, I felt alone. Neither one of us were believers at the time. I actually stepped outside of the marriage and had an affair, but through that turmoil, God called us both into a personal relationship with him. And it was through that healing and the testimony that God gave us, this just an incredible testimony, that David was actually asked to share that one time at a retreat center in California. And somebody heard the testimony, and then the next year they desperately needed some people to lead a marriage retreat for various circumstances. And someone who had heard that testimony is like, oh my gosh, I know the perfect person. So we called up David and said, hey, you don't know me, but I heard your testimony last year. Would you and your wife be willing to come out and lead a retreat for us? And that was our first retreat, and that was in 2006. And we've been asked to come back there every year, and that's when it just started building. And then that's when David felt called to leave his corporate world. He was climbing that corporate ladder, like I said. And it was just all through this few-year period that just transformed our lives. And he left his job, went to seminary, pastored the church for 7 years, and it just, yeah. So around 2006 was just a huge turning point that God used our testimony, his testimony in our lives, just to put us on a new trajectory, and never looked back.
Yeah, it was like a Damascus Road encounter. And once I met Jesus Christ for the first time at age 33, it rocked my world. Nothing mattered to me. I wanted to know everything there was to know about Jesus. And it's through that we got to tap into healing, God's healing presence, perspective, and a call that's been put on our lives that's not a vocation, it's not a job, it's a calling. And it's different than anything I've ever experienced, anything we've ever experienced.
And that's the difference. We meet a lot of people. I want to do what you do. How can I get started? How can I do it? And I'm like, we didn't plan this. If you would have asked us, 25 years ago, I would have laughed in your face. We did not plan this. It was purely God's call on our lives, to leave our jobs and to do this. And so we tell people, we can't tell you what to do. If you're choosing to do it and you want to do it, that's between you and God. Because for us personally, it was purely just a calling.
Well, it's interesting though, and I say this, and people don't believe this. When I was 14 years old, 2 years after my parents got a divorce, my father gave me a Christmas present because my parents weren't talking to each other, so they would often use the children to get messages back and forth. And my father gives me a unique gift the kind of gift every 14-year-old boy wants, or maybe doesn't want. He gave me a set of used cassette tapes, 24 used cassette tapes by Dr. Gary Smalley, Hidden Keys to Loving Relationships. And I'm like, what is a 14-year-old boy going to do with that? And he was hoping that my mom would take them and then she would listen to them to figure out why he divorced her, kind of thing. But it backfired. What my father didn't realize is I would listen to those tapes every single day from 14 years old all the way until I graduated college. I was living vicariously through the stories that Dr. Smalley would talk about his family, because I didn't have a dad that was present. In fact, I wasn't even talking to my dad shortly after that. Well, it was after that gift. Didn't talk to him for 7 years. But I knew inside that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do what Gary Smalley was doing. But I lost that dream and thought it was all about the money, and thought I needed to get a finance degree in accounting and go be in the next Wall Street, genius. And it just was not part of God's plan. So, yeah. Interesting though. Bertie, is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. I was thinking about. It truly, God's guidance led you where you're at, isn't it?
Definitely, definitely. And that's why we talk about the power of testimony, because if it had not been for David sharing our testimony, even without my permission, this might not have ever happened, So we are called to go share what God's done in our lives, and to give other people hope. And so your testimony is a beautiful thing that needs to be shared.
I'm sure that you help many, many couples through your ministry.
Yeah, God has blessed us. We have the privilege of ministering to a little over 12,000 marriages every 12 months.
Wow.
And I've been doing this now for over 20 years. So, yeah.
Well, we appreciate you sharing with us tonight. And do you have any departing words? We finished an hour.
Yeah, just thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to just address your alliance there. Yeah.
Maybe Pastor David could close us out in prayer.
I would love to. Yeah. Father God, we thank you so much for opportunities like this where we're able to just step in and just share what you have done. It's not about what we have done. It's what you are doing through your people who call upon your name. And Father, you have done just that. It was our prayer over 20 years ago that you would use us as your instruments, and you have done that beyond imagination. Lord, I ask for your blessing upon this organization, that you take them to heights and resource beyond anything they could imagine as they continue to build your kingdom here on earth. Lord, we love you so, so much. And Jesus, thank you for teaching us how to love. It's in your name that we ask these things. Amen.
Amen.